begin the Purge. Overlord Vaskir's command was not shouted, nor did it carry anger. It was delivered with the certainty of a man who had orchestrated the conquest of entire star systems. The bridge of the Tyrannus Prime was eerily silent after those words, as if the entire fleet held its breath before descending upon the doomed world below. A moment later, the sky over Earth split open. From the darkness beyond orbit, Zenvar warships unfurled like an iron storm, their hulls reflecting the golden flames of atmospheric entry. Mass drivers ignited. Plasma lances speared downward. Kinetic rounds punched through stratospheric drag, burning streaks into the planet's surface. What had been cities only moments before erupted into blinding geysers of stone, steel, and fire. In London, the Tower Bridge melted as an energy burst tore through its Gothic spine, sending molten steel cascading into the river. In New York, entire boroughs collapsed like sandcastles under the weight of tidal bombardment. Shanghai, Tokyo, Rio, Moscow, Cairo, all turned to smoldering husks within minutes. Vaskir watched the display from the command bridge, his darkened irises flickering with the reflections of Earth's demise. Beside him, Fleet Master Ziril stood rigid, his sharp features set in stone. He had seen planetary conquest before. This should have felt routine. Yet something unsettled him. "Resistance?" Ziril asked, though he already knew the answer. "Minimal," came the clipped response from a comms officer. "Orbital platforms neutralized. Ground forces scattering. There's no coordinated defense." A pause. Then, "Something is wrong," Ziril murmured. The statement was not based on logic, but on instinct, an inexplicable sensation gnawing at his mind. Humanity was known for its stubbornness. Even fractured species put up a fight before breaking. But here? No global distress calls, no frantic transmissions, no last-minute counterattacks, just silence. He could almost feel the weight of it pressing against his skull. Beneath them, the remnants of Earth's defenses flickered against the storm. A few scrambling fighters surged through the wreckage, their formations shredded before they could fire a single shot. The last vestiges of humanity's orbital fleet burned in bright, pathetic bursts, blinking out one by one. A desperate hail came through comms, a human voice, unsteady but clear. "This is Commodore Dane Halvern of the United Earth Directorate. To the invading Zenvar fleet, may you rot in your own filth." Then a deafening electromagnetic burst flooded the comms channel, blinding the fleet's lower band relays. Vaskir didn't even flinch. "Trace it. I want the origin incinerated." "Already gone, Supreme Overlord," Ziril muttered, his jaw tightening. They sacrificed their own transmission source. From orbit, Zenvar commanders deployed ground forces. Heavily armored dropships punched through the upper atmosphere, releasing shockwave pulses that flattened anything left standing. Columns of black-clad soldiers marched through burning streets, weapons drawn, scanning for resistance. They found none. Sector 1 secured. Sector 5 clear. No significant hostiles. Sector 9. Wait. Sir, something's off. Vaskir leaned forward, observing the feed. Helmet cam footage from a Zenvar recon unit showed an empty boulevard, shadows flickering through the remnants of half-standing skyscrapers. The air was thick with vaporized concrete and burning synthetic alloys. A bank of fog rolled unnaturally low, creeping over ruins like a hunting animal. The lead Zenvar soldier, Sergeant Kryl, stepped forward, visor scanning the smoke. His boots crunched on the charred debris. Then he froze. Something moved. Not the skittering of vermin, not the collapse of unstable wreckage. This was something deliberate, measured, watching. "Cryo, report," barked the field officer. A moment later, Crail's feed cut to static, then the next soldier's, then the next. The last frame captured before blackout, a shifting silhouette, its outline warping like the air itself was rejecting its presence. Then darkness. "Contact lost with Ground Division 5, came the stiff report. Zyrel exhaled sharply. "They're hunting us." Vaskir's expression remained unreadable. "Deploy additional units. Exterminate the stragglers." His confidence was unwavering, as if the disappearance of a few soldiers meant nothing in the grand scale of conquest. And perhaps it didn't. But Zyrel knew better. He knew the ghosts of war when he saw them. This silence was not surrender. It was something else, something calculated. The skies rumbled again, not with battle, but with the residual heat of Zenvar warships breaking low orbit. The fleet had turned Earth into a lifeless husk in less than 6 hours. Cities now lay in charred heaps, blackened towers stretching like fingers toward an unfeeling sky. Still, no surrender came. No weeping planetary leaders. No desperate counteroffer for survival. No futile threats of retaliation. Just absence. "Have we confirmed the planetary network is offline?" Zyrel asked, still unable to shake the unease gnawing at him. "Yes, sir. Full blackout. No transmissions, no signals, no automated distress beacons. Earth is officially—" Then, without warning, every screen on the bridge crackled to life. For the first time since the invasion began, a human face appeared. Not pleading, not desperate, calm. A man sat in shadow, only his eyes illuminated by an unseen screen. His expression was unreadable. The image flickered with static, but the voice came through clean. "Do not mourn us." Zyrel felt his pulse slow, like the moment before stepping into a battlefield riddled with mines. The bridge crew stiffened. Even Vaskir's fingers curled subtly, a rare movement of interest. The man's gaze never wavered. The weight of a dying world sat behind it. Wait. The screen cut to black. For the first time since the attack began, the Zenvar fleet registered an anomaly. Not a fleet approaching. Not a hidden weapon system activating. Not even a distress signal. Earth had disappeared. All satellite feeds, long-range sensors, and orbital relays blinked offline. Even visual confirmation flickered into a black nothingness where the planet had been. A communications officer's voice broke, raw with confusion. "Sir, Earth just vanished." Vaskir stared at the darkened screens. "Explain." "No energy readings, no planetary signals, no life detection systems responding. It's as if Earth was never there." Zyrel exhaled, feeling his stomach turn. "Overlord," he said slowly. "I think we've misunderstood them." The fleet hung in orbit, adrift in eerie silence. The conquered world below was gone. Not destroyed. Something worse. Silent. Dead. Waiting. The Zenvar fleet drifted in orbit, their ships like obsidian monoliths suspended in the abyss. Earth, or what should have been Earth, lay beneath them, a motionless husk. The planet's surface radiated no signals, no heat signatures, no electronic residue. It was as if the world itself had exhaled its last breath and collapsed inward, swallowing all trace of its existence. On the bridge of Tyrannus Prime, the silence was oppressive. Overlord Vaskir's gaze was locked onto the dead world below, his fingers curling against the edge of his command throne. The stillness of the planet gnawed at something primal, something that even war had not carved out of him. There had been no resistance, no final plea for survival, only silence. His officers shifted uneasily. Fleet Master Zyril stood stiff beside him, arms clasped behind his back, jaw clenched so tight his ridged skin paled at the joints. "We need confirmation," Zyril said, his voice tempered steel. The bridge's central holodisplay pulsed erratically as deep space sensors swept for anomalies. The readouts returned static, a flickering mess of corrupted data streams. Then, one of the auxiliary warships exploded. It happened without warning, a silent rupture of metal and atmosphere that sent debris spinning into the void. A Zenvar battlecruiser, fully shielded, fully operational, gone in an instant. The bridge had descended into chaos. Officers barked fragmented reports, hands flying over their control interfaces. Every external sensor registered nothing. No external impact. No energy discharge. It was as though the ship had simply ceased to be. "Where is the attack coming from?" Vaskir demanded, his voice colder than vacuum. "Unknown," came the strained reply from a communications officer, her eyes flicking over multiple data streams. No energy readings, no ship signatures, no projectile remnants. Another warship detonated, this time from within. Flashes of burning atmosphere vented from the hull before the entire structure imploded, a dying beast folding in on itself. Panic rippled through the bridge crew. This was not battle. It was execution. Zyrel's hands curled into fists. "I told you something was wrong." Vaskir ignored him. "Deploy full ground forces. I want confirmation of Earth's condition." The order sent dropships plummeting toward the surface, their armored hulls splitting the atmosphere as they descended into the thickening darkness. From orbit, the planet looked like a corpse wrapped in its funeral shroud. The once burning cities now sat in a mist-laden gloom, untouched by wind or motion. Inside one of the descending transports, Commander Vos Dranek adjusted the clamps on his battle armor. The reinforced plating pressed against his shoulders, cool to the touch, weighty with purpose. Approaching designated LZ, a pilot muttered through the cabin intercom. The dropship vibrated as it breached lower airspace, the planet's gravity pulling at it like grasping fingers. Voss could hear the faint strain of the hull under atmospheric drag. He focused on the mission. Deploy, assess, exterminate the remaining human forces. That was the order. "Touchdown in 10, the pilot called. 9, 8, a flicker on the exterior scanners. 7, a whispering anomaly in the atmosphere readings. 6, 5, the dropship buckled. 4, the entire sky fractured. A pulse of unknown energy surged up from the ground, not an explosion, not an attack, but something deeper, something older, something reaching through the fabric of physics itself. The dropship convulsed mid-air, its systems failing in rapid succession. Alarms shrieked. Metal screamed as control overrides seized navigation. Voss barely had time to brace before the ship flipped violently, sent spiraling toward the ruined cityscape below. The viewport flashed with images, the skeletal remains of skyscrapers, the uneven glow of distant embers, a chasm splitting open in the pavement beneath them. Impact. Metal crunched. Bones rattled. Voss slammed against his restraints, his vision darkening for an instant before white-hot pain yanked him back. The dropship had crumpled into a smoking wreck, half its structure embedded in shattered concrete. The other half lay strewn across the desolation like discarded entrails. Silence. The kind of silence that did not belong to the aftermath of war. Voss gritted his teeth, unclipping his restraints. Status. a ragged cough from the co-pilot's seat. Partial systems failure. Weapon systems offline. Comms cut off. Outside, the city remained still. No wind, no movement. A graveyard where no one had buried the dead. Voss pushed himself out of his seat, armor scraping against the torn interior. He gripped his rifle, stepping cautiously through the ruined hull. The air was thick, dense in a way that clawed at the lungs, though his suit's internal systems filtered it efficiently. His boots crunched against debris as he stepped onto the open street. The buildings loomed, empty steel tombstones covered in creeping shadows. Then he saw it. A shape moving at the edge of his vision. Not the flicker of flames, not shifting rubble. Something deliberate. Watching. Waiting. Voss lifted his rifle, scanning the darkness. Motion trackers flared to life, detecting movement too erratic to belong to wind patterns. "Eyes up," he muttered into his fractured comms. Then the first scream rang out. Not human. Zenvar. Voss spun, catching only the blurred shape of one of his squad mates being dragged into an alleyway, limbs flailing before vanishing into the pitch-black void between structures. A garbled transmission crackled in his helmet. What? Who's there? Static. Then another scream. Another shape vanishing. A shadow moved across a crumbling wall, its outline shifting unnaturally, as though reality itself was bending to accommodate its presence. Voss's pulse pounded against his skull. The first shot fired. One of his own men, blindly discharging plasma rounds into the dark. The muzzle flash illuminated the alleyway for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. In that instant, he saw them. They were not human. Not entirely. Figures clad in jagged, chameleonic plating, armor shifting with the environment like living shadows. Their helmets bore no insignia, no markings of allegiance. Their weapons did not hum with energy discharge, did not fire streaking plasma bolts. They fired something worse. Kinetic rounds punched through Zenvar armor, tearing flesh with brutal efficiency. Silent, precise, final. One of his men barely had time to scream before the bullet tore through his visor, exiting clean through the back of his skull. Panic fractured the squad. Some ran. Some fired wildly. None survived. Voss felt something cold touch the base of his skull. A barrel. A voice, calm, human, cutting through the shadows like the first crack in ice before it shatters. "You should have left us alone." The barrel pressed deeper. Voss did not beg. He did not speak. He did not have time to. The last thing he saw was his own blood painting the ruins of a world his kind had thought already dead. Voss Dranek's corpse was still cooling when the first Zenvar cruiser vanished. Aboard the Tyrannus Prime, Overlord Vaskir listened as another fleet officer barked frantic reports, his voice cracking beneath the weight of the inexplicable. Commander Voss and his squad. Gone. Vaskir's fingers curled against the steel armrest. Elaborate. The officer swallowed, eyes darting across fractured data streams. Ground forces deployed to investigate the surface. Not a single response since their descent. We've lost all feeds. Thermal signatures vanished instantly. No debris. No wreckage. No bodies. Vaskir exhaled slowly. This was not incompetence. This was something else. Something worse. "Recall all ground units still in orbit," he said coldly. A nod. The orders were issued. But the recall command never reached its destination. The ships meant to retrieve the ground forces had simply disappeared. No impact signatures, no emergency flares, no final transmissions. Just gone, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. A whisper of unease slithered through the bridge crew. Then another vessel blinked off their displays. Then another. It wasn't battle. It wasn't war. It was a hunt. Zyrel's voice was tight when he spoke. "They are inside our network." Vaskir turned toward him, slow and deliberate. "Explain." Zyrel gestured toward the terminal, where the fleet's encrypted command relays flickered erratically. "The fleet's coordination systems are experiencing interference. If this were a standard cyber assault, there would be signatures, overload triggers, malware spikes, some trace of an origin point. There's nothing." Vaskir's throat felt dry, his mind dissecting the impossible. This wasn't sabotage. It was control. He looked out toward the Zenvar fleet. Colossal warships stood in their formations, weapons primed, shielding active, engines burning cold. But something was wrong. Then it happened. A Zenvar dreadnought turned its guns inward. The Vatharis, one of their oldest, most powerful warships, shifted position without warning. Its targeting arrays locked onto an adjacent cruiser, cannons charging before any officer could countermand the firing sequence. A volley of kinetic rounds lanced through the void, tearing the cruiser apart in an instant. Screams erupted from the comms. "No! Stop! What are you doing? Cease fire!" Another warship followed suit, then another. Their own fleet was turning against itself. "Override the targeting systems," Zyrel shouted, hands moving swiftly over the interface. "Shut down all automated command chains." Static swallowed the bridge, thick and suffocating. Then the ship's internal security feed flickered to life. A message. Simple. Cold. Unfamiliar. "You do not control your own empire." Then, darkness. The Vatharis detonated in a chain reaction of ruptured fuel cores, sending molten fragments of its hull spiraling through the carnage. Panic erupted across the fleet. Officers scrambled for answers. Commanders shouted into dead comms. Zyrel's fingers blurred over controls trying to regain access. Nothing responded. This was not chaos. This was preparation. Vaskir stood unmoving amid the storm, watching his empire fracture under invisible hands. "Retreat," he ordered. The word felt foreign leaving his mouth, a thing he had never spoken before. Silence. Then, navigation is offline. Vaskir's pulse slowed. Manually override. "We're locked out, Overlord. Someone, something, has overwritten our fleet controls." Vaskir's voice was a whisper. "Then we are already dead." The lights flickered. The security terminals flashed erratic static, and then a voice, cold and mechanical, filtered through every ship, every fleet-wide transmission, every encrypted channel. It was not a Zenvar voice. "Run!" The dreadnoughts lurched, not through propulsion. They were being pulled. In the cold blackness of space, something impossible emerged. A ripple, a distortion, a manipulated singularity where no mass should exist. Zenvar warships twisted unnaturally, dragged against their own engines as gravity tore through them like a predator through bone. One ship was ripped in half. Another was flattened inwards, collapsing under the unseen force. Humanity had changed the battlefield. They were not engaging in direct conflict. They were dismantling the laws of war itself. The galactic empire that had raised countless civilizations was now the prey. The galaxy was watching. Every faction, every empire that had ever trembled beneath the Zenvar rule, now saw something new rise from the ashes of Earth. A force that did not ask for surrender. It simply eliminated. And it wasn't finished yet. Zirel looked at Vaskir, a thin sheen of sweat forming at his temple despite the cold, artificial air of the bridge. His voice was brittle. "We can't fight something we don't understand." Vaskir's eyes didn't leave the devastation outside his viewport. His world, his empire, reduced to ghosts in the dark. "Then we don't fight," he murmured. "We survive." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Survival was no longer their choice to make. Vaskir watched his empire burn. Through the reinforced viewport of Tyrannus Prime, the wreckage of his once mighty fleet drifted, gutted by invisible hands. Twisted hulls cracked and peeled apart, torn from within by a force beyond their understanding. His warships, vessels that had subjugated 1,000 worlds, were now little more than broken relics spinning into oblivion. The air on the bridge felt thinner, as though the ship itself had begun to suffocate. "They are everywhere," Zirel whispered. His hands trembled over the control interface, failing to regain control of anything. Every system, every ship. They don't just fight, they embed, they consume. Vaskir said nothing. His mind raced through the possibilities, each more damning than the last. Humanity had not repelled the invasion. They had prepared for it. Their survival had never been in question. They had known this day would come, and instead of stopping it, they had let the Zenvar walk into their own grave. An alert pulsed red across the war table. The Dominion's capital, Chorus Prime, was under attack. Vaskir's jaw tightened. "Get us there. Now." Zirel hesitated. "We don't control the fleet's navigation. We dash." The ship moved. Not through manual input. Not through commands from the bridge. It moved because something else was taking it there. Vaskir exhaled slowly. "Then we will witness the end firsthand." The stars warped, streaking past as the ship plunged toward the Dominion's core world. Chorus Prime loomed beneath them, a colossus of steel and stone, its atmosphere thick with the glow of planetary defenses. Towers stretched toward the heavens, their surfaces shimmering under artificial shields. This world had never fallen. Not once. Not in 1,000 cycles of conquest. And yet, it was already dying. The moment Tyrannus Prime breached low orbit, Vaskir saw the devastation. Entire districts lay in smoldering ruin. The planetary grid flickered erratically, shields collapsing in chaotic waves. Defense turrets turned on their own forces. Fortress gates refused to open as Zenvar battalions were trapped outside, cut down by unseen attackers. From orbit, he saw the phantoms of humanity's war machine at work. They had arrived before him. Not in fleets, not in grand, conquering armadas. They had come through the cracks, embedded in the very infrastructure of his dominion. Deploy ground forces, Vaskir ordered. A transmission cut through the static. There are no ground forces left, Overlord. It was General Kavix Thal, broadcasting from the war chambers of the Zenvar High Command. His voice was hollow, raw with something that no warrior should ever show: fear. We never saw them, Kavix continued. They walked through our defenses untouched. They turned our own weapons against us before we even realized they were here. Entire sectors have fallen without a single battle. Static surged. Kavix inhaled sharply. Then, in a voice that barely registered above a whisper, he spoke his final words. They are not fighting us, Overlord. They are burying us. The transmission cut out. Vaskir clenched his fists. His body felt heavier, the weight of the inevitable pressing against him like an iron shroud. The bridge crew was silent. Even Zirel, so often the voice of caution, had nothing left to say. The Dominion's final world, the beating heart of their empire, was being erased in real time. From the planetary surface, a single ship ascended through the wreckage, a human vessel. Unlike Zenvar warships, which were built for brutal, overwhelming sieges, this craft moved with purpose. There were no wasted movements, no erratic course corrections. It rose into the sky as if it had always belonged there. Vaskir watched it approach. He knew what would happen before the first transmission came through. The bridge speakers crackled. The voice that followed was human, male, cold as the void itself. Overlord Vaskir. No introduction, no title, just a statement of fact. Vaskir lifted his chin. Who speaks? A pause. Then, the last mistake you ever made. The bridge plunged into darkness. The ship lurched violently, its artificial gravity spiking before stabilizing. Red emergency lights cast the command deck in a bloody haze. Every system shut down at once. Power, weapons, shielding, navigation. Something else had taken control. Vaskir exhaled, slow and measured. You will not break me with parlor tricks, human. Break you? The voice hummed, amused. Number? We're far beyond that. Vaskir's display terminals flashed back to life. Only one image appeared. Chorus Prime, seen from orbit. At first, it looked the same. Burning, broken, suffocating under its own downfall. Then the atmosphere shifted. The storm clouds curled inward, unnatural in their formation. A pulse rippled through the stratosphere, a distortion spreading outward like an invisible tidal wave. One by one, the planet's surface lights flickered out. Not destroyed, disabled. Vaskir's heart slowed. Do you understand what you're looking at? The voice asked. Vaskir did. He knew exactly what this was. The Zenvar Dominion had not been defeated. It had been stolen. Not by an armada. Not by an overwhelming force. By something far worse. By a species that had chosen revenge over survival. The last of Chorus Prime's satellites blinked out of existence. The entire world disappeared from sensor readings. Erased. Not from history. Not from memory. From reality itself. Vaskir closed his eyes. This was the end. But not for humanity. For the Zenvar. For everything they had built. for the idea that they had ever been strong. The transmission faded. The human vessel descended back into the darkness. It had no need to fire a single shot, because the war had already been won. The Zenvar just hadn't realized it yet. Chorus Prime was gone. Not burning, not crumbling, not conquered. Gone. A world that had ruled the Dominion for centuries, erased from every sensor, every recorded archive, every fleet registry. The planetary grid no longer registered its coordinates. The Zenvar homeworld had been unmade, stripped from the very fabric of existence. On the bridge of Tyrannus Prime, Overlord Vaskir stood in suffocating silence. His empire had not fallen in battle. It had not been crushed by overwhelming force. It had been undone. The screen flickered again, and that same voice, calm, human, merciless, spoke once more. "Do you understand now?" The question lingered, a whisper curling around the edges of inevitability. Vaskir's fingers twitched, the weight of centuries pressing against his shoulders. His fleet, the last remnants of Zenvar supremacy, drifted powerless. No communications, no weapons, no navigation. His people had never been given the dignity of defeat. They had been erased like a mistake on a ledger. "Speak," Vaskir growled, his voice raw. "If this is war, let us end it in battle." Laughter. Low. Measured. "War?" the voice repeated. "That implies you had a chance." Vaskir's breath slowed. His kind had conquered entire civilizations, broken species beneath their heel, rewritten the laws of galactic dominance. Every world that had fallen to them had been made to kneel or burn. And now they were the ones brought to their knees, not through strength, not through brute force, but through something far worse, through inevitability. "You invaded our home," the voice continued. No hatred behind it, no righteous fury, just a chilling certainty. "You thought we were weak. You thought we would beg." A pause, just long enough to twist the silence into something unbearable. "But we are not like you. We don't fight for conquest. We don't fight for survival." A flicker of static, then. "We fight to end you." Vaskir's throat tightened. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," the voice replied. "It makes us necessary." The ship trembled, not from an attack, but from something deeper. A sensation that crawled through the steel beneath their feet, through the circuits, through the very ship's core, an unraveling. Zyril staggered back from his console, his hands open, empty, useless. "They're still inside our systems." "They never left," Vaskir muttered. One by one, the displays around the bridge blinked out. Red warning lights pulsed erratically, their rhythm unnatural, wrong, like the dying breath of something once thought immortal. Then the fleet began to vanish. Not in fire, not in wreckage, just disappearing. First, the outer cruisers, their hulls shimmering, distorting, then gone. The battle formations once held in ironclad discipline melted into void, into memory, into nothing. Vaskir gritted his teeth. His people had built the strongest war machine the galaxy had ever known, and now it was dissolving before his eyes. And the worst part? There was no enemy to fight. Enough. His voice no longer held command. It was an offering, a plea carved from the last remains of defiance. The human did not respond immediately. When he spoke, The weight of his words landed harder than any bombardment. You never understood, did you? A map flickered to life, cast in pale light. Not of the Dominion. Not of Zenvar-controlled space. A map of what used to be Zenvar-controlled space. Sector by sector, system by system, it was going dark. The capital was gone. The strongholds disconnected. The trade routes shattered. Entire colonies cut off, left to starve, to turn on one another in the wake of leadership that no longer existed. This wasn't defeat. This was a collapse so complete that even history would struggle to recall it. Vaskir's chest tightened, not in rage, not in sorrow, in realization. You're not just killing us. His voice came as a whisper. You're making sure we never existed. That, the human said, is the difference between you and us. The words landed like a death knell. Vaskir had overseen the destruction of countless civilizations, but none had been so final. No empire had ever been erased, not just from the present, but from the future. For the first time in his life, Vaskir felt it. True, absolute, undeniable terror. The great Zenvar Dominion, the supreme force of the stars, had been a footnote in someone else's war. The last transmission came not as a threat, but as a declaration. You will not be remembered. The bridge's gravity failed. Vaskir felt himself drifting, weightless, powerless, as the ship's structure disassembled around him. Zyral's mouth opened in a soundless scream as his form shimmered, broke apart. And then, nothing. No war. No empire. No Zenvar. Only silence. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the wreckage, the remnants of the galaxy watched. They did not cheer. They did not mourn. Because, for the first time, they understood what humanity truly was. Not rulers, not conquerors. Something worse. Something patient. Something that had been waiting for far longer than anyone had realized. The final human transmission echoed through the stars, reaching ears that would never again question Earth's place in the cosmos. Do not mistake our silence for weakness. We are patient. We are watching. Attack us again, and we will not leave even your memory behind. The message ended, and the stars remained.